Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our NMD training webinar series. This is going to be part one of our boot camp that's going to be covering the basics of NMD data entry. Our learning objectives today are going to be about recognizing how registry data can be used for facility benchmarking and quality improvement. We're going to explain the connection between entering accurate, complete, and timely data for maximizing the value of your registry participation. And we're going to go over how to upload complete data into the NMD and resolve validation and rejection errors to maximize the value of your participation. So I'll quickly introduce myself. I'm Zach Smith, Senior Quality Programs Assistant with the ACR's Quality and Safety Department. I'll be helping to run the webinar today, and I'll be administering a few polls where we're going to be asking for some audience feedback. So just be ready to answer some questions when we get to those polls. Now I'll introduce our speakers. We're going to be joined by Dr. Robert Rosenberg, who practices mammography for Radiology Associates of Albuquerque. That's a private practice in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He's a fellow of the Society of Breast Imaging, currently the chairman of the ACR's National Mammography Database Committee, and also the chairman of the National Mammography Quality Assurance Advisory Committee of the FDA. He's professor emeritus from University of New Mexico Department of Radiology and a former principal investigator with the Breast Cancer Surveillance Consortium, an NCI research group. Our next speaker is Gretchen Maris, who's the data analyst for clinical radiologists based in Springfield, Illinois. She possesses a degree in healthcare informatics and has worked for clinical radiologists since 2008. As the main part of her duties with clinical radiologists, she manages and completes all ACR NRDR registry submissions for 29 hospitals, 2 multi-specialty clinics, and 1 imaging center, all serviced by clinical radiologists and the 79 radiologists they employ. Also joining us for today's webinar are 2 members of the ACR's National Radiology Data Registry staff. First, Lou Meyer, Senior Quality Program Specialist, and also Ryan Kiefer, Associate Quality Program Specialist. And none of our speakers have any relevant financial disclosures. Before we get started, I just wanted to remind everyone, if you haven't joined by audio yet, you can hit pound, enter your audio pin, and then hit pound again. You can also just join by computer audio if you'd prefer. And if you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can type your question into the text field under the tab labeled questions. We'll try to answer those as we go by text. And we're also going to be putting together an FAQ sort of thing with all the questions that were asked today. And we'll send that out to all the registrants by email. We'll also be sending a recording of this webinar to everyone as well. So just be looking out for that in your email after this is complete. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Gretchen Maris. Thank you, Gretchen.
Thanks, Zach. I would like to introduce everybody to the NRDR Knowledge Base, which is pictured here on the slide. The knowledge base can be accessed several different ways. One way is the link to the address there at the top of the slide. Another way is from the bottom of the sign-in page for the NRDR by clicking on the NRDR support link. There's a couple of other ways, just going to acr.org. So I won't go into all of those, but there's multiple ways to get to this knowledge base. And what the knowledge base is both a knowledge warehouse and a learning tool for all aspects of the registries included in the NRDR. As some of you might remember, if you were early users, in the past, the NRDR provided separate user guides for each registry and for the MIPS portal. Now, within the knowledge base, all of this information has been combined and made available to you as a very user-friendly, single, online searchable resource. The knowledge base contains both general and specific information regarding the NRDR. When searching for the topic for which you have a question, you use the search bar located at the top to type in your question, or it can just be keywords. Once you click search, the search function matches what you have typed against the entire knowledge base content and the titles of the articles in the knowledge base using the keywords that you've typed in. Once you click on one of the results that it gives you, and read through the information. At the bottom of the page, you're asked if the information provided was helpful. Please take advantage of this chance to rate the information that has been provided by the NRDR. By clicking on an answer, either yes or no, you'll be assisting the ACR in making the knowledge base more powerful in the future. If you are unable to find the information on what you're searching for, it is suggested that you create a support ticket using that new support ticket link up there to the right of the search. And then someone with the ACR will contact you to assist you with your issue. So now we would like to ask all of our participants a question. Next slide. We would like to know how familiar everybody is in the audience with the NRDR knowledge base. So whether you use it often, occasionally, rarely, you know about it but have never used it, or you've not heard about it at all until today. And I'll let Zach take care of the poll after everybody's answered.
Okay, we're just going to give everyone a few seconds to get the responses in, and then I'll share the results when that's complete. Okay, we've got about 75% of people responding, so I'll share these results really quick. So it looks like quite a few people just were not familiar with the Freshdesk knowledge base at all, so I'm glad you're here on this webinar. About 31% knew about it, but have never used it, and a good population of people use it occasionally as well. So thanks, everybody. Now I believe we're going to move on to Ryan Kiefer, who's going to give a quick demo of how the knowledge base works. Let me switch screens with you, Ryan. Give me just one moment.
Thanks, Zach. Echoing a little bit of what Gretchen said, this is our knowledge base for not only our NMD but also for all the registries that we administer. The good part about having this knowledge base here is that it's always developing, always kind of we are always monitoring the content. We enter in new content when it's applicable. And focusing on NMD for a second, we'll go ahead and take a look at, for instance, the data submission overview. And what you're going to see within the boot camp is a lot of what is already in the database now, and it discusses the differences in versions, such as the formats available for upload, any types of excluded data, and includes patient dictionaries in here as well. And then at the bottom, you have the did you find this helpful, yes or no. And then if you wanted to go ahead and send us a ticket, you would just click on new support ticket and then type in your information. As a note, when it comes to instances of PHI, please do not attach PHI in tickets, or do not respond with PHI. Freshdesk is a robust knowledge base, but it's not as good as, say, for instance, Dropbox or Box when it comes to levels of security. And then you'll go ahead and put in your email address, if you have it, your facility ID and your facility name, and then you would go ahead and put NMD down here and the nature of your inquiry. And then when it comes to Freshdesk tickets, you'll get an email notifying you that that we've received your inquiry, and there's a ticket number assigned to it. And our operations team usually responds within within the same or next business day, and they can go ahead and route it to the appropriate person of contact. And the knowledge base resources are also going to be linked in the chat window as well, so you can go ahead and open those and review and bookmark at your leisure. And with that, I think we're going to go ahead and turn it over to Rob for a little bit more information.
All right. Next slide, please. So what's important about our quality is knowing how we're performing, looking for where we can do better, and inherent in that is how do we do compared to others. I think what's most important is being an outlier, not being an outlier. And so the purpose of the National Mammography Database and the reports we create for the radiologist and for their practices is so that one can be compared at the practice level, at the radiologist level, to their peers, not to a research group or a more select group, but to regular practicing radiologists. So this is about ensuring quality for our patients. And then, in terms of the second thing, ensuring quality to the people we report to also, which would be the leadership of a group, which may be a big organization, and or the payers. And that can be important. Again, where does one stand with one's peers? Are we doing good quality for our patients? And can we improve in just constant quality? The research component is also practical and is tied very much into quality for general radiologists. It should be useful for practices, but the purpose is where can we as a whole as radiologists, and including technologists, we're very important, where can we improve? How does new technology impact what we're doing? Do we get our money's worth out of the new technology? And where can we do better as a whole? So that's really the purposes of the registry for National Mammography Database, and I think for also a lot of the registries for ACR in general. Next slide, please.
Rob, I think you were going to talk about this first.
Sorry. So the data elements are key. If we don't send in the right data, we're not going to get the right information. This is the typical, this is one of the standard reports that you will see that you can download from the website for yourself. And again, it shows how your facility is doing on these different parameters. And then it shows how you compare to other facilities in the National Mammography Database. Accurate information in is critical to accurate information out for both you and for the other facilities that are going to be compared to. I think Gretchen, are you next?
I am. As Rob was saying, it's important to report the data, and it's important to report accurate data. Most mammography programs look at specific calculations that provide data regarding their program efficacy, such as screening recall rate, which is also sometimes referred to as abnormal interpretation rate now, cancer detection rate, and positive predictive value. The data elements to compute these are derived from the data that is uploaded into the NMD and includes data elements such as the total number of screenings, the total number of BI-RADS 0, 4s, and 5s that they had, the number of true positives, and the number of false positives. So once that data is uploaded and computed in the NMD, those data can be used to determine your physicians' and your facility's performances. You can also compare those data to other registry-defined data groups, which also utilize data included in the registry. You can see on that sample report on the screen, across the top, there's a comparison already between the facility and the NMD as a whole. This also demonstrates how your data is important in this entire process. It's a part of other facilities being able to do the same thing that you're trying to do with the data. The data contained in the NMD is also not just for these facility and physician level reports or for MIPS. It's available for and utilized in many different research projects, which we will be touching base on later in the webinar. There are Also, other data elements that can be included in the registry that are considered optional and happen to be some of my favorites. The inclusion of these optional elements, such as cancer history information, race, height, weight, and even a patient's zip code, could have current and future value in the registry. For instance, the zip code could be used to identify how the prevalence of certain cancers might be different in very specific regional areas, of zip codes. So we at the ACR believe that an abundance of good data will move this NRDR registry towards its max value for both research and its use in the MIPS quality payment program. Next slide. Rob.
Got to get off muted. So critical outcomes. We need key data elements. These should, in general, be required. Indication for exam. Was this a screen? Did the patient have symptoms? Critical is the BioRad's overall assessment. What was it a recall? Abnormal? Was it normal? Cancer detection rate is the goal of mammography. Finding cancers. How often did you find cancers? Some of the extra information sometimes tells us about your population, which may influence your cancer detection rate. And PPV, positive predictive value, very, very important. It tells us in some sense how much we're annoying or harming patients. Do we know cancer when we see it? Are we recalling patients often enough, but especially too often? The PPV is important because it's at different levels of the process. PPV 1 is at the screen, PPV 2 and 3 at the level of biopsies recommended and biopsies done. Gretchen.
As Rob said, certain data elements are necessary for the proper calculation of all of these comparative rates. For the to touch base a little bit on the explanation of the cancer detection rate, for the calculation of a radiologist or a facility's cancer detection rate, the registry takes the reported number of true positives and they divide it by the reported total number of screening mammograms that were done. This value is then multiplied by 1,000 and you come up with a number with a decimal point, so 4.3, for instance. So that resultant value shows a radiologist or a facility how many cancers that they are most likely to discover in 1,000 of their screening mammography reads. And I'm not sure that everybody was actually aware of that, but we thought it was really good to explain what that means. So you can take that number and kind of estimate if you read 3,000 MAMs in a year and your CDR was 4.3 for 1,000, then you're gonna read approximately 12.6, or you're going to find approximately 12.6 cancers out of those reads. So it's kind of good to know the explanation of these comparative rates as well. Rob, next slide.
So in terms of quality improvement, each physician you want to monitor, and you monitor physicians both to create what's their quality and consistency within the group. And the key elements for each physician is going to be, again, positive predictive value. How often are your positives cancer? And your cancer detection rate. Did you find cancer? And again, cancer is a rare entity in mammography. We're looking at 4 or 5 per 1,000. And then recall rate, how many patients get recalled out of your screening number. It's useful to look at individuals each year, again, to track whether people are improving or staying the same, and that's critical. And improving cancer detection and staging follow-up, again, these are important. Are you finding early cancers? Are you finding late-stage cancers? you pick up DCIS, ductal carcinoma in situ, compared to invasive cancers. So those are all really critical things, but it requires the pathology be entered after the imaging is performed. But that's critical. What are you finding? Gretchen?
To give an example of how my organization utilizes the data in quality improvement, we monitor our individual physician quality through the data that is tracked in the NMD. So within my own organization, we have an internal policy that requires all of our radiologists to do extra mammography training when they have fallen outside of the normal guidelines in screening recall rate, cancer detection rate, or PPV for 3 successive quarters. So this extra training is usually in the form of the ACR breast imaging boot camp, and in order to know who needs to attend that, I take all of the available data from the NMD facility and the physician screening level reports for each of my sites, and then go back to the raw data elements, which is the total screens, the total number of BI-RADs, 0s, 4s, and 5s, etc. And then I calculate each radiologist's overall CDR, screening recall rate, cancer detection rate, and PPV based on the data from all of the sites that we read for. And then we use this data to monitor the overall progress of our RADs, helping us to determine who needs that refresher course. This is assuring that we are keeping our mammography program as current as possible, and it provides our patients with the best possible service that we can give. Next slide, and Rob.
So these are examples of some of the graphs that come out of your report. There's a line in the center, which is where does your facility, or if you're looking at the physician level, where does your physician fall within all the other physicians? Are they an outlier or not? Cancer detection rate and PPV3 are the 2 we have presented. ACR has had recommended ranges. Breast Cancer Surveillance Consortium also has published recommended ranges. If you're within the group, you're probably safe, but optimally, for instance, PPV3 is around 31%. So that's a third, basically, of your cancers on a biopsy done. Cancer detection rate averages about 4.1, so 4 cancers out of 1,000 screens. So these are critical for understanding where you are as a physician and or a facility compared to your peers. Gretchen.
So both of these charts are available in the 2 different reports that you can get from the NMD. And if you know your CDR, whether it's a physician level or the facility level one, you can see it there on the line. We can also see in that top chart where you fall in the curve of all of NMD as far as the median or the mean. So you can see that in that top one, they're in that 4.0 rate, but they're slightly under the max of that curve. So you can take these charts and you can utilize them with your administration meetings, things like that, with your payers to demonstrate where you are in comparison to everyone in the NMD. And then you can use it also to determine if you need to make improvements within your organization. So it can be used to demonstrate quality to both your leaders and to demonstrate where you are with the quality inside your own department.
Yeah, and one other point that needs to be made for these is anything related to cancer depends on the statistics of how many cancers you find, and Gretchen's well aware of that. So if the estimated number of cancers is fairly small, you're going to have a wide range of just random variability. That's one of the major advantages of having higher reading numbers, your statistics for cancer will be much better.
Thanks, Rob. Next slide.
So, use cases, research studies. As we said, the purpose of the NMD is also to move breast imaging forward. Where does it need to be better? So we have ongoing projects looking at African American women, which may be a little bit different, either in whether they're getting screened, and that relates to entering one of these variables of ethnicity and race, and where people live, which would be zip code. Age, we know, makes a difference. Weight might matter, but these are data elements are very helpful in understanding the population that is being screened and the population that's not being screened. And so that's really very important. Age-wise, we know breast cancer incidence, breast density varies with age. So 40 was created as a number for when we start screening, but is that really critical? So these are the kinds of things that can be looked at to decide where we should be putting our resources in terms of screening, who needs screening. How are we doing? Wendy Berg just created a paper on BI-RADS3. Are people utilizing BI-RADS3 correctly? The answer is actually they're doing a very good job. It's being done as it was described, and the outcomes are about what we were expecting from smaller, mainly academic places. And then finally, new technology. We're working on tomosynthesis. What are going to be the outcomes of tomosynthesis across facilities? We know it costs more, it takes longer to read. What are we getting for that? How different is it from digital mammography? So these are research studies we're doing based on where do we want radiology, where do we want to put our resources and move forward. Next slide. If you're interested in what we've done or where we're going, this is a listing of some of the data requests. People out there interested in research, please send us research questions you'd like to work on. We have a small committee that we are doing research. But this is very important because this is the future of radiology. And we don't want to just look at past performance, but move things forward. Next slide.
So in this section, we'd like to discuss the typical life cycle of an exam in the NMD registry. The cycle starts when you add a screening exam for your reporting software. This is represented by the top box in the first step on the slide. If you're using NMD certified software, it will have a function that you can use to generate an NMD file. The next time you generate a file, the screening exam will be included in the file. Let's suppose you decide to generate an NMD file at this point. You upload the file and check for any errors. Assuming there are none, the record for this exam now exists on the database. This is shown in the bottom box in step 1 on the slide. You may notice that the MRN appears in a field on the database called Other ID. This is a generic identifier that uniquely identifies a patient at your facility. Most facilities use the MRN for this purpose. Now let's look at step 2 on the slide. If the patient returns for additional imaging, this would be the next step in the life cycle. You would enter the exam in your reporting software as a diagnostic exam. At this point, you can generate another NMD file and upload it. You now have 2 records for this patient in the NMD, a screening exam and a diagnostic exam. Now let's look at step 3. If the diagnostic exam was positive, then at some point, you will get pathology results and enter them into your reporting software. Then you will need to generate an NMD file again, making sure that the data range you use includes the diagnostic exam date. That way, the file will include all the data for the diagnostic exam both the data you originally entered and the pathology results. When you upload this file, the existing record for the diagnostic exam will be updated with the pathology results. Now let's say it's time for us to run the quarterly aggregate NMD reports. This is the next step in the life cycle. These reports calculate performance measures based on the data that you've submitted, as Gretchen discussed earlier. For every positive screening exam, the logic looks for pathology results that were found for that patient within 1 year of the screening exam. So it will associate the pathology results on the diagnostic record with the screening record and calculate follow-up measures like positive predictive values, cancer detection rate, and others accordingly. So in the example on the previous slide, we saw that the screening exam reported in step 1 had an assessment of 0, making it positive. The logic will look for pathology results on any of the records for this exam up to 1 year from the screening date of January 1. It finds the malignancy reported in step 3 and consequently includes the screening exam in both the numerator and the denominator of the follow-up measures. In other words, this exam will have a positive effect on measures like the cancer detection rate, positive predictive values, and so on. So on this slide are some examples of how positive predictive values and other measures are represented on the reports. We'll cover the reports in more detail in part 2 of the NMD bootcamp. These reports are issued every quarter. It may be that you didn't get pathology results in time for you to include them in the report for the current quarter. In that case, you should submit the diagnostic exam again. That way, the registry will be updated with the pathology results in time for your next report. Those results will be included when the measures from the previous quarters are recalculated. The measures are calculated using data from all facilities within your organization, not just the facility where the patient had her screening. So it may be that the patient in our example went to your facility for her screening, and she went to some other facility for her diagnostic or follow-up exam. As long as that facility is in your organization and used the same patient identifier, the data from her diagnostic exam will be used to calculate measures for your facility. On the other hand, if she came to your facility for her follow-up after having her screening done somewhere else, it's important for you to report the results of the follow-up so that the screening facility can have their measures accurately calculated. The results will not, however, affect your measures, since at this time we only calculate measures for screening exams. This slide shows an example of a trend line. The reports include trend lines that show the history of your facility's performance going back to when you first submitted data. The last step in the NMD life cycle occurs after 2 years have passed since the exam date. At that time, the exam will no longer appear in the detailed tables shown on the previous slides. It will, however, show up in the trend lines indefinitely. So in that sense, we can say that the life cycle never really ends. So now I'll invite Rob to comment on upgrading to version 3.
So technology changes and the questions we want to answer change, and the questions that a facility would want to know are changing. The biggest conceptual change in version 3 from version 2 is we're including all the modalities. So instead of focusing primarily on just the screening mammogram and mammography, this includes ultrasound, breast MRI, and inherently screening breast ultrasound, and new technologies such as tomosynthesis. There's always a bit of a lag between when technology occurs and we can update our systems. So it's useful conceptually to upload some older data that may have version 3 information when you update from version 2 to version 3. So updating older version 2 information. And a good example of where we get new information that we're going to look at is, well, better information about diagnostic mammography, not just screening mammography. Thank you. Lou.
Yeah, I'd like to comment on some of the new fields whose meaning might not be obvious, like laterality of audit exam. Version 3 lets you report data at either the breast level or patient level. For example, you could assign 2 assessments, one for the left breast and one for the right breast. This would be the breast level. Or you can have just one assessment for both breasts, which would be the patient level. This field tells us which method you're using. If you're using NMD certified software, this is an option that you can configure when you first start using version 3 and leave it. You don't want to change this frequently because then your audit results would be derived from a mix of breast and patient level data, which wouldn't make any sense. The combination exam data element is similar. NMD defines a combination exam as 2 or 3 exams or components conducted on the same patient for the same indication on the same day using different modalities. Version 3 lets you report data at either the component level or the combination level. For example, for a combination exam consisting of a mammogram and an ultrasound, you can assign one assignment to the mammogram and a different one to the ultrasound, or you could just assign one assessment for the combination exam. We've added a second and third physician identifier so that you can enter up to 3 separate assessments from different physicians for the same exam. This enables you to more accurately audit assessments from double reads using one of the various methods described in the follow-up and outcomes monitoring section of the BI-RADS Atlas. These assessments are used in calculating measures by physician. You still have to report a single assessment for the entire exam, which is used in calculating measures by facility. Next slide, please. We really appreciate the software vendors who have made the effort to go through the certification process for version 3. It's a time-intensive 3-step process. First, they provide us with a flat file that demonstrates that they can populate every field with every possible value. The second step involves analyzing 33 examples in the BI-RADS Atlas and correctly representing them in an NMD file. They also must provide an accurate audit of these examples. Once they've completed the first 2 steps, we list them as conditionally certified, as you see on the bottom of the slide. To complete their certification, and as a more robust test of their audit logic, they must provide an accurate audit based on about 200 random examples that we provide. There are actually 3 versions of NMD version 3. Version 3.1 includes all the fields from 3.0, plus an additional field where you can specify the facility ID where the exam took place. That way, you can upload exams from multiple facilities in one file. Version 3 doesn't allow you to specify a facility ID. It assumes that the exams that you're uploading took place at the facility ID that you're using to upload the file. Version 3.2 includes all the fields from 3.1, as well as fields for reporting optional COVID information about the patient. You can use any of the 3 versions, but we encourage you to use the latest one. Next slide, please. We recommend that you talk to your team about the benefits of transitioning to version 3.0 or 1 or 2 before starting the process. It varies from vendor to vendor, so it's important to get instructions from your vendor on how to do so. If your vendor doesn't offer a version 3 release, we'd love for you to tell them of your interest in transitioning, because customer interest is a major factor in a vendor's decision to commit resources to a new release. The process for uploading a version 3 file is the same as uploading a version 2 file, so there's no additional challenge there. You can use a version 3 file to update records that you have previously reported using version 2. In fact, we encourage you to reload as many of your previous records as you can in order to take advantage of the new fields in version 3 and capture your ultrasound and MRI exams. If you encounter difficulties in generating a version 3 file, you should let your vendor know so they can resolve it for you. If they need help from us, just let us know and we'd be happy to work with them. Whether you transition to version 3 or not, we'd very much like to know which vendor you're using. When your facility registered for NMD, the person completing the registration had to indicate your vendor. Over time, that might have changed, so we ask that you log on to the NRDR portal and check your registration to see if that information is still accurate. This will help us identify problem areas that may be specific to a certain vendor. Now, we'd like to take a poll and ask about your thoughts about transitioning to version 3.
So this first poll is just asking how likely you are to move to version 3.0 in the next 12 months. You can choose likely, unsure, unlikely, or let us know if you're already using version 3.0 or 1 or 2. Okay, I'll give that just a few more seconds. Thanks everybody for the responses so far. Okay, so it looks like mostly people are not sure. We've got a few people saying likely, a few people saying unlikely, but 73% not quite sure. And then we've got 5% of respondents who are already using one of the version 3s. So we've got one more poll after this. So this poll is a choose all that apply. We'd like to know, what are your biggest barriers to moving to version 3.0? And so please select all that apply. Is it expense, time, data input burden, lack of expected return on investment? Is it a lack of institutional support, or is it just system software issues? Thank you for the responses so far. Give it a little bit more time. Okay, thanks everybody. It looks like the three biggest issues are expense, system software issues, and just the time and the data input burden. So thanks everybody for your responses on that. So now I'll hand it back over to Ryan Kiefer, who's going to talk about preventing common data errors.
Thanks, Zach. The good news is when it comes to errors in reporting, a lot of it to do with formatting or kind of incomplete information. And as I'm going through here, Gretchen, if you have any additional input, feel free to go ahead and ring in. When it comes to data errors, errors regarding missing or incomplete physician NPIs is one. We'll get into uploading data a little bit more in part two. But while there is a physician identifier, we usually recommend that the NPI be used, and that way it's a little bit better tied into the reports that we generate on the quarterly and more frequent and quarterly basis. Patient ID conflicts. If there's an identifier that had been used for a patient, and then there's another identifier that is suddenly used, the system will go ahead and create a new record for that patient using that new identifier. So then, or you may have different patients that have the same ID. For instance, like the other ID, some facilities will maybe use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. And you'll get conflicts that way. There's a patient dictionary in the NRDR portal, which you can go ahead and use and kind of cross-reference against what you're attempting to upload to see what type of discrepancies there are.
Sometimes it kicks it back to that there's already one that's been created, and a lot of times that has to do with an updated record where you have the Medicare beneficiary ID, the new one, but they have the old that's already been put into the registry.
Right, and if you're going in for, say, for instance, a third record, if they're coming in for another follow-up, and you have some identifiers that you're using, the system will maybe pick up on the shared identifier that that patient has, and then if you're looking at like a second or a third identifier, then it's not entirely sure where it should match it up. So there'll be an error that comes through that way. Date's not invalid date format. Simply put, 2-digit month, 2-digit day, 2-digit year. So if you were uploading NMD data today, or if someone came in for a exam today and you're uploading that data, you would put in 08202020 with the slashes. And I should note as well that when it comes to file specifications and valid values that our system is expecting when it comes to NMD data, we do have file specifications and an NMD data dictionary that are in the knowledge base that we were talking about earlier, that get into what you can put in, what you can't put in, things of that nature. And periods and commas in name fields. Simply put, we're looking for alphas when it comes to names and things like that. If you put in commas or if you put in hyphens, if you put in periods, then it'll go ahead and reject because it's not sure what it is that you're putting in.
A lot of those are also from the software that they're using on the site. Some of them have a field where you can put like a also known as, or so like for me, I go by my middle name and they might put that in quotes. A lot of times they'll put that in that first name field, which it'll kick back out. And same with the dates. That also, the thing that I see a lot on my end is they'll put in their software, they might put 082020 because their software converts it, or they think it does, to 2020, but when it comes out exports to 08202000. So that's an okay one, but sometimes it puts the zeros in front and then it's 0020, which is 1920 or something. It doesn't know where to read that. So dates are important.
And that's a good point as well. And you actually just brought up something that I wanted to go ahead and address as well. If you're a facility that you're uploading data using the Excel file format, and we'll kind of get into a deeper dive in terms of how to upload and formats to upload. If you've been uploading your own data and you do make the switch to a vendor to go ahead and generate a file for you, sometimes they'll go ahead and put in their own identifier for the record, and not use the identifier that you're using, or they may add some additional characters onto the identifier that you're using, which you may have used before and is in our patient dictionary. But because those new characters are in there, it's going to go ahead and create a new record. So if you do make the switch from an Excel file format to having a vendor create a file for you, you want to make sure that they're pulling in what it is that you'd like to have put in for that. And so then that way it's as seamless a process as possible. Gretchen, did you have anything else to add in this area?
No, I did want to, well, sort of. The missing NPIs, you can upload, if I'm not wrong, you can upload records that don't have NPIs and they'll allow them to go into the registry. What they won't do is use those particular records for calculation of CDR and screening recall rate because there is no physician NPI attached to them, correct?
Right, right.
And then they also will not count if you're using the registry for your MIPS submission for your organization, that data will not also count for the MIPS submission because there is no doctor to tie it to.
Right, and much as I keep kind of hyping our part 2 next week, what the MPI will do, or what an incorrect or a missing MPI will do, is the system will go ahead and save the record as sort of like a shell record. And then once you do have that MPI, you can actually reload the record with the MPI. And the MPI will overwrite the shell record that has that null field in it, and then it'll go ahead and be construed as a complete record. And I think with that, we'll be turning that back over to Rob.
So as noted in the prior, errors get made and they can get perpetuated. There's an old computer term, garbage in, garbage out. That affects not just your facility, but also some of the comparisons. If you look at the histograms of some of the outcomes that are part of the report, you'll see outliers, which are probably the result in part of just data entry errors. And so an error means, or not having good data means that your measures are not that useful to you or anyone else. Another example of good data, and it takes a little extra effort, is putting in complete pathology data. What's important in terms of the outcome for the patient is, was this an early cancer or not? I think your radiologist would want to know how many of their cancers are in fact node positive, and how big actually was it. Sometimes we're surprised from the mammogram that the cancer was really significantly larger. Those are things that would require tracking the patient past the imaging to the actual surgery. And it takes an extra bit of effort, but in general, we know where we send the patients to. And while there are confidentiality issues, radiologists should have a legitimate reason to know what the actual pathology was of the patient after they went to surgery. And there's a delay, obviously, between the imaging and the surgery and getting the surgical result, but that's very, very important information. Other less common issues are upgrades. We do a core biopsy, we get early breast cancer DCIS. Sometimes the cancer is more extensive than that. Only know that once you have final pathology from the surgical pathology, not just the core biopsy pathology that we do track. So I strongly encourage following patients to get that extra bit of information, nodes, and actual cancer size. Next slide, please.
Okay, so I think that pretty much wraps it up for our bootcamp today. I just wanted to go over a few links just to remind everybody of what's available out there. And we'll send these slides out when we send the recording to everyone. So just be looking out for an email either later today or early tomorrow. It's going to have a link to the recording of today's presentation and a PDF of the slides. So you can click all these links when you get that email from us. But just a reminder, we've got the NRDR Knowledge Base. You can get to that at nrdrsupport.acr.org. And again, we will be sending an FAQ of the questions from today's webinar. We would also love if you could provide feedback through the survey linked here. So any NMD feedback you have, please click that link, let us know your thoughts. And then lastly, like we've already mentioned a few times today, we would love if everybody could join us for the part 2 of the bootcamp, which is going to be focused on NMD data submission and reports. We had a great turnout today, and a lot of people are registered for that part 2 already. So again, that's August 26th at 2 p.m. Eastern. So we hope to see everyone there. And finally, just a quick note about claiming CE credit. We are going to be sending the instructions for claiming CE for both this webinar and next Wednesday's webinar. We'll be sending those via email following the activity. That'll come at the latest by September 4th, Friday, September 4th. So when you get that email, click on the link follow the instructions and you can use that to claim your credit. That email is going to be coming from Alexis LeCount, who's our CME person at ACR. So any questions that you have about how to claim that credit, you can email her at alacount@acr.org. And that'll do it for today's webinar. We just want to say thanks so much to everybody who joined us, and we hope to see you next week. And thank you very much to all our speakers.
And feedback is always useful, as we've commented for everyone else. We really appreciate your time, and we want to make this useful, and other topics that could be helpful, let us know.
Okay, thanks everybody, and have a great day.